Is there anyone here who feels that man is not basically lazy or that people are not basically lazy?
I haven't had no rosy life, and I don't think there are very few in here that have had a real rosy life. And like I still been about the point that I agree that basically that man is mostly lazy. Now, I was motivated by OIC to come and better myself, to, in other words, I see other people with good jobs, good houses, you know, nice things. I say to myself, well now, why can't I get off of my lazy behind and get some of these things?
Colored kids have no image. All our images are white. There's no ambition. Who can we say that was great?
There's a lot of the Negroes complain about we never had. I grant you, the Negro has been discriminated against 100%. Yes, I grant you that. But not only Negro, not only the Negro, but look how many Jews. Look how many Jew people were burned in thousands. But yet these people didn't let it stop them. They wanted something. They wanted. That's right. So why can't the Negro do this? Stop being lazy. Stop waiting for someone to hand something out to you.
That's right.
These men aren't lazy. They were just beaten down so that they didn't believe they could get up. A man has to believe he comes from something, that he comes out of something, that he's somebody. Therefore, he has to be traced back to where he began, so they can have a sense of pride for being what he is. Once a man has respect for what he is, he doesn't have to hate anymore.
We do not have to be better than other men, and we are not, in fact. We are a group of men. We have a genius here and there, a fool now and then, and most people are just average. Now, we will have to be viewed as such. And it has to be, the nation must face the fact that black Americans received a hell of a lot of help getting in the predicament we're in. We're going to need just as much help getting out of it. I'm sure that when black children can look and see that there was a king that was black with woolly hair, just like them, who ruled over an empire larger than the United States, like Mali was larger than the United States, then certainly I can run a candy store in the block where I live successfully. Or certainly I can go to school and become an engineer.
And remember, I am asking you not just to hire the Phi Beta Kappas and the Lena Horns. I'm asking you also to apply to let apply and to hire dumb Negroes like you do dumb white people, and mediocre Negroes like you do mediocre white people.
Frank Donovan, General Electric in Bridgeport, very persuasive.
Thank you very much.
You feel that the businessmen and leaders at the meeting this morning were receptive to these ideas?
I think they were receptive because I didn't make an appeal on a moral basis. I tried to point out the reality situation. And the reality is that Negro citizens today have learned the messages of Patrick Henry, and the issue is liberate me or exterminate me. And that America has to make a decision whether it's going to build a wall around the Negro community and have concentration camps, or whether it's going to engage in genocide and destroy the Negro community. Neither of these ideas is novel. I mean, Hitler has already showed us how this might be done.
How do you, as the director of the National Urban League, respond to the charges made and that the Urban League is a part of the system?
Is a what?
Is a part of the system.
I don't deny being a part of the system if you're saying that I'm not trying to violently overthrow it. I am not trying to violently overthrow it. I'm a part of the system in the sense that I do talk to the establishment, but those are the people that give the jobs. I mean, it's like Mr. Powell out in California the other day called me the Wall Street of the Civil Rights Movement. I must confess, I get more jobs off of Wall Street for my people than I do at the end of the world bar in Bimini.
Chapter 4, the so-called dependency complex of colonized peoples. In the world, no poor devil is lynched, no wretch is tortured, in whom I too am not degraded and murdered. And that's a quote by Amy Cesar. When I embarked on this study, only a few essays by Manioni published in a magazine called Psyche were available to me. I was thinking of writing to M. Manioni to ask about the conclusions to which his investigations has led him. Later, I learned that he had gathered his reflections in a forthcoming book. It is now being published, Prospero and Caliban, Psychology of Colonization. Let us examine it. Before going into details, I should like to say that its analytic thought is honest. Having lived under the extreme ambivalence inherent to the colonial situation, M. Manioni has managed to achieve a grasp, unfortunately too exhaustive, of the psychological phenomena that govern the relations between the colonized and the colonizer. The basic characteristics of current psychological research seems to be the achievement of a certain exhaustiveness, but one should not lose sight of the real. I propose to show that although he has devoted 225 pages to the study of the colonial situation, M. Manioni has not understood its real coordinates. When one approaches a problem as important as that of taking inventory of the possibilities for understanding between two different peoples, one should be doubtedly careful. Mr. Manioni deserves our thanks for having introduced into the procedure two elements whose importance can never again escape anyone. A quick analysis has seemed to avoid subjectivity in this field. M. Manioni's study is sincere in purpose, for it proposes to prove the impossibility of explaining man outside the limits of his capacity for accepting or denying a given situation. Thus, the problem of colonization includes not only the interrelations of objective historical coordinations, but also human attitudes toward these conditions. Similarly, I can subscribe to the part of M. Manioni's work that tends to present the pathology of the conflict, that is, to show that white colonial is motivated only by its desire to put an end to a feeling of unsatisfaction on the level of adoration overcompensation. At the same time, I find myself opposing him when I read a sentence like this: the fact that when an adult Malagasy is isolated in a different environment, he can become susceptible to the classical type of inferiority complex proves almost beyond doubt that the germ of the complex was latent from his childhood. In reading this, one feels something turns upside down on the author's objectivity, threatens to lead one into error. Nevertheless, I've tried zealously to retrace his line of orientation, the fundamental theme of his book. The central idea is that the confrontation of civilized and primitive men creates a special situation, the colonial situation, and brings about the emergence of a mass of illusions and misunderstandings that only a psychological analysis can place and define. Now, since this is M. Manioni's point of departure, why does he try to make the inferiority complex something that antedates colonization? Here one perceives the mechanism of explanation that in psychiatry would give us this: there are latent forms of psychosis that become overt as a result of a traumatic experience. Or in somatic medicine, this is the appearance of the varicose veins in a patient does not arise out of his being compelled to spend 10 hours a day on his feet, but rather out of the constitutional weakness of his vein walls. His working conditions are only a complicating factor. And the insurance compensation expert to whom the case is submitted will find the responsibility of the employer extremely limited. Before taking up M. Manioni's conclusions in detail, I should like to take my position clear. Once and for all, I will state this principle: a given society is racist or it is not. Until all evidence is available, a great number of problems will have to be put aside. Statements, for example, that the north of France is more racist than the south. The racism is the work of the underlings and hence in no way involves the ruling class. That France is one of the least racist countries in the world are the product of men incapable of straight thinking. In order to show us that racism does not reflect an economic situation, M. Manioni reminds us that in South Africa, the white laborers are quite as racialist as the employers and managers, and very often a good deal more so. I hope I may be forgiven for asking that those who take it on themselves to describe colonialism remember one thing, that it is utopian to try to ascertain in what ways one kind of inhumane behavior differs from another kind of inhumane behavior. I have no desire to add to the problems of the world, but I should simply like to ask M. Maoni whether he does not think that for a Jew, the differences between the anti-Semitism of Moraes and the Goebbels are imperceptible. After a presentation of the respectful prostitute in the North Africa, a general remarked to Sartre, "It would be a good thing if your play could be put in Black Africa. It shows how much happier the Black man is on French soil than his fellow Negroes are in America. Sincerely believe that a subjective experience can be understood by others, and it would give me no pleasure to announce that the Black problem is my problem, and mine alone is that it is set up to me to study it. But it does seem to me that M. Maoni has not tried to feel himself into the despair of the man of color confronting the white man. In this work, I have made it a point to convey the misery of the Black man, physically and effectively. I have wished to be objective. Besides, that would be dishonest. It is not possible for me to be objective. Is there in truth any difference between one racism and another? Do not all of them show the same collapse, the same bankruptcy in man? M. Maoni believes that the concept of the poor whites of South Africa for the Negro has nothing to do with white economic factors. Aside from the fact that this attitude can be understood through the analogy of the anti-Semitic mentality. Thus, I would call anti-Semitism a poor man's snobbery. And in fact, it would appear that the rich, for the most part, exploit this passion for their own uses rather than abandon themselves to it. They have better things to do. It is propagated mainly among middle classes because they possess neither land nor house nor cattle. By threatening the Jew as an inferior and pernicious being, I affirm at the same time that I belong to the elite. We could point out to M. Maoni that this displacement of the white proletariat's aggression on the Black proletariat is fundamentally a result of the economic structure of South Africa. What is South Africa? A boiler into which 13 million Blacks are clubbed and pinned in by 2.5 million whites. If the poor whites hate the Negroes, it is not as M. Maoni would have us believe, because racialism is the work of petty officials, small traders, and colonials who have toiled much without great success. No, it is because the structure of South Africa is a racist structure. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Happy Monday. Welcome back to On the Shoulders of Giants. I am Joseph Ward, and I am reading chapter 4 of Frantz Fanon's book, Black Skin, White Mask. And chapter 4 is the so-called dependency complex of the colonized. And we're getting into the idea or the concept or the analysis of the relationship between the colonized and the colonizer, the relationship between the dependent and the one who is being depended upon, the superior and the inferior, the whites and the Blacks, right? Black people around the world were colonized by white people. And there's a fallout effect of it on the behavior of Black people, especially in their behavior in relation to the people who colonized them. And so specifically here in America and the United States, Black people, we do have a dependent relationship upon white America. But why is that dependent relationship in place? Because Black people could choose to do without the white power structure, do without the white resources. But Frantz Fanon is getting at that there's a psychological or even a let's say there's a psychological reason why Black people are dependent upon white people. And this psychological reason that he's getting into that I was reading earlier is in relation to how we were acculturated, how we were programmed to exist as Black people within the system of white supremacy, or in this case, what Frantz Fanon is talking about, in colonial structures. How is the colonized supposed to act in colonial structures? Is the colonized supposed to be a dependent group of people? Is the colonized supposed to be a group of people who have the wherewithal or the mindset to even depend upon themselves solely? And we're going to get into these ideas. We're going to get into the argument, because the idea, and especially going back to the opening video where the black men are talking about black people being lazy. Of course, that's a stereotype that was placed upon black people by whites. Going back to the idea that black people don't want to work. Black people just want to sit back and let white people do everything. And so that's one of the fundamental parts of the idea of the black laziness. But it also goes into, even if black people, like the guy said at the end of the video, black people working for the government, black people working for the man, black people, when we go home, the man, we go to homes built by the man. We go to homes that are mortgaged by the man. We go to homes that are powered by the man. We go to homes that are repaired by the man. We go to homes, like we watch TVs, all this technology is given to us by the man and the white man's companies. So there is a level of dependence, but why is the dependence so strong? Why is the psychological dependence so strong, right? And so our chapter focus for chapter 4, the focus is, Fanon critiques how Western psychology and psychiatry misdiagnoses colonized black people. And that's what he was getting at earlier. They're looking at us through their lens. They're looking at us through the lens of the colonizers instead of looking at us through the lens of people who have been colonized for over 500 years. Labeling their struggles as personal and pathological dependency complexes instead of recognizing them as the natural result of colonial oppression and systematic racism. So it goes back to his example of the varicose veins. And they're using black people in the same light. And the idea of the white supremacists is black people have always had this inherent laziness within them. Black people have always had this inherent dependence within them. And the situation of racism, white supremacy, or colonization just brought that out of them. It was dormant, and that allowed that to show through the situation, or the stress of the situation, or the circumstances allowed that to come to the surface. So black people have always been dependent upon other people for their survival. And especially now they're dependent upon the white people, the white supremacists, or the white masters, because the white masters had the right conditions to bring out that laziness, to bring out that dependence. So that's what the white supremacists are getting at. And that's what M. Maoni specifically is getting at, because that's what we're analyzing. So that's what M. Maoni is getting at. And that's what Frantz Fanon is refuting. That's what we're going to refute as well. But you can see the ideas of laziness have already been ingrained in the psyche of a lot of black people, who are in turn diagnosing other black people through the lens of their oppressors as well. So that's what we're getting into today. So key points in this chapter: colonial psychiatry misrepresents the black reality, right? That white lens. We're going to get into Frantz Fanon's critique of M. Maoni. We get into the inferiority complex is social and not biological. That has to be understood. Inferiority complex is social and not biological. The role of colonial education and society, how education and society shapes the minds of those who exist within it. Alienation through Western psychology and the mask of dependency, right? And then we're going to hit Frantz Fanon's main argument and the closing thought for the video, right? So, like I said, the chapter focus, once again, is Fanon is critiquing how Western psychology and psychiatry misdiagnoses colonized black people, labeling their struggles as personal or pathological dependency complexes instead of recognizing them as the natural result of colonial oppression and systematic racism. And so, let's get back into it. This is page page 87. I'm picking up on page 87 where it says, "What is South Africa?" And remember, this chapter starts on page 83. It starts on page 83, chapter 4, the so-called dependency of colonized people. All right, so let me get back to 87. All right. Remember, hit that like button, comment, subscribe, share, support this channel. Make sure your notifications are turned on so when I drop a video, you'll be able to get it. So make sure you check out everything that I got going on. Check out Monday's live stream with the brother Q Butter. We had a great interview talking about the Ziax Institute and what they are actually doing with the young children right now in the STEM fields. And make sure you check out Sunday's clip where we're talking about the health industry and the scamming that's going on in that. So, man, y'all, we got a lot of content going on in this, and we got a lot more coming up. So stay with us. Please hit that like button and please subscribe and help us get to 100,000 subscribers. We are on our way. Thank you to everybody. So let's get back into it. What is South Africa? Oh, excuse me, I read that. Okay, so Negrophilism or philanthropy are pejoratives in South Africa. What is proposed is the separation of the natives from the Europeans, territorially, economically, and on the political level, allowing the blacks to build their own civilization under the guidance of and the authority of the whites, but with a minimum of contact between the races. It is understood that territorial reservations will be set up for the blacks and that most of them will have to live there. Economic competition would be eliminated and the groundwork would be laid for the rehabilitation of the poor whites who constitute 50% of the European population. It is no exaggeration to say that the majority of South Africans feel an almost physical revulsion against anything that puts a native or a person of color on that level. Remember that. That's how white people think. Remember that. To conclude our consideration of M. Maoni's thesis, let us remember that economic exclusion results from, among other things, the fear of competition and the desire both to protect the poor white class that forms half the European population and to prevent it from sinking any lower. M. Maoni adds, colonial exploitation is not the same as other forms of exploitation, and colonial racism is different from other kinds of racism. Well, please inform us, Mr. Manioni. Please inform us. He speaks of phenomenology and phenomenology and psychoanalysis of human brotherhood. But we should be happier if these terms had taken on a more concrete quality for him. All forms of exploitation resemble one another. They all seek the source of their necessity in some edict of a biblical nature. All forms of exploitation are identical because all of them are applied against the same object, man. When one tries to examine the structure of this or that form of exploitation from an abstract point of view, one simply turns one's back on the major basic problem, which is that of restoring man to his proper place. Colonial racism is no different from any other racism. Only a fool would think it is. Anti-Semitism hits me head on. I am enraged. I am bled white by an appalling battle. I am deprived of the possibility of being a man. I cannot disassociate myself from the future that is being proposed by my brother. Every one of my acts commits me as a man. Every one of my silence, every one of my cowardices reveals me as a man. Everyone, how I behave in every aspect of my life, no matter the situation, reveals what type of man or person that I am. Yes. When I wrote this, I had in mind Jasper's concept of metaphysical guilt. And this is what he's saying he wrote. There exists among men, because they are men, a solidarity through which each shares responsibility for every injustice and every wrong committed in the world, and especially for crimes that are committed in his presence or of which he cannot be ignorant. If I do not do whatever I can to prevent them, I am an accomplice in them. If I have not risked my life in order to prevent the murder of other men, if I have stood silent, I feel guilty in a sense that cannot in any adequate fashion be understood judiciously or politically or morally. That I am still alive after such things have been done weighs on me as a guilt that cannot be explained. Sometimes in the heart of human relations, an absolute command imposes itself. In case of criminal attack or living conditions that threaten physical being, except my life only for altogether otherwise, not at all. And that's by Carl Jaspers in La Culpabilité El Monde in Janae Hirsch's French translation. Jasper declares that his obligation stems from God, right? It is easy to see that God has no business here, unless one chooses not to state the obligation as the explicit human reality of feeling oneself responsible for one's fellow man. Responsible in the sense that the least of my actions involves all mankind. Every action is an answer or a question, perhaps both. When I express a specific manner in which my being can rise above itself, I am affirming the worth of my action for others. Conversely, the passivity that is to be seen as troubled periods of history is to be interpreted as a default on that obligation. Young and aspects do dream contemporarian says that confronted by an Asiatic or a Hindu, every European has equally to answer for the crimes perpetrated by Nazi savagery. Another writer, M. Marseille Choisy, in La Année de Polycrite, was able to describe the guilt of those who remained neutral during the occupation of France. In a confused way, they felt that they were responsible for all the deaths and all the butchering walls. So let's get into some of the key points, right? Let's get into our first key point. And our first key point is colonial psychiatry misrepresents Black reality, right? What does he mean by that? So European psychiatrists and psychoanalysts tried to explain Black behavior using Western models, ignoring the impact of racism on colonial domination. So it goes back to what I was saying earlier, how they're going on the thesis or the idea that the inherent laziness, the inherent, I guess you could say, degenerate behaviors that Black people are expressing in a colonial state, those behaviors have always existed in Black people. And like I said earlier, these conditions in these states allow these behaviors to come about. So the European is exposing the true nature of the African. And the true nature of the African is one who is lacking what they need to survive on their own. So the idea is before Europeans show up, African people just standing in one spot waiting on Europeans to come save them, right? The inactivity, the inability to be independent, they're saying, is being described as a dependency complex. And they claim that Black people had a dependency complex, a supposed psychological need to be cared for by whites. So white people are saying the Black dependency is something that's inherent. Fanon is saying the Black dependency is a result of colonization, is a result of being stripped of everything, is a result of being programmed, is a result of the reinforcement of the destructive behaviors that white people continue to do against Black people. So the conditions and the behaviors were created. They're not inherent. That's what Fanon is getting at. And so if we get into his critique, right, his critique rejects the view, arguing that what psychologists call a dependency complex is the effect of colonization. Like I said, colonization strips people of independence, dignity, and control, creating conditions of forced dependency. We were stripped of everything that we had before we were colonized, before we were enslaved. The way Black people operated before Columbus showed up, it's not the same way Black people are operating post-Columbus. post-colonial. The way we operate now, he's saying is a direct psychological result of these years of slavery, 500, 600 years of slavery, of our negative interactions with the white man. So, all right, so getting back into the reading. So Fanon is saying, he starts off by saying, I feel that I can still hear Cesar. And he's talking about Amy Cesar. And he can still hear Cesar saying this. When I turn on my radio, when I hear that Negroes have been lynched in America, I say that we have been lied to. Hitler is not dead. When I turn on my radio, when I hear that Jews have been insulted, mistreated, persecuted, I say that we have been lied to. Hitler is not dead. When finally I turn on my radio and I hear that in Africa, forced labor has been inaugurated and legalized, I say that we have been lied to. Hitler is not dead. It's getting to the mentality, the behaviors of the colonists. Yes, European civilization is, and yes, European civilization and its best representatives are responsible for colonial racism. And I come back once more to Cesar, right? And this is so that was Fanon was saying, yes, European civilization and its best representatives are responsible for colonial racism. Then he's saying, I come back once more to Cesar. And Cesar is saying, and then one lowly day, the middle class is brought up short by a staggering blow. The Gestapos are busy again. The prisons are filling up. The torturers are once more inviting, perfecting, consulting over workbenches. People are astounded. They are angry. They say, how strange that is. But then it is only Nazism. It won't last. And they wait and they hope and they hide the truth from themselves. It is savagery, the supreme savagery. It crowns, it epitomizes the day-to-day savageries. Yes, it is Nazism, but before they become its victims, they were its accomplices. That Nazism they tolerated before they succumbed to it. They exonerated it. They closed their eyes to it. They legitimized it because until then it had been employed only against non-European peoples. That Nazism they encouraged. They were responsible for it, and they were responsible for it, and it drips, it seeps, it wells from every crack in Western Christian civilization until it engulfs that civilization in a bloody sea. It is how Western civilization gets down. It's passed down from generation to generation. It's what they do. Whenever I see an Arab with his haunted look, suspicious on the run, wrapped in those long ragged robes that have seemed to be created especially for him, I say to myself, M. Manioni was wrong. Many times I have been stopped in broad daylight by policemen who mistook me for an Arab, but when they discovered my origins, they were disingenuous in their apologies. Of course, we know that a Martinician is quite different from an Arab. I always protested violently, but I was always told, you do not know them. Indeed, M. Manioni, you are wrong. For what is this meaning of this sentence? European civilization and its best representatives are not responsible for colonial racism. What does it mean except that colonialism is the business of adventurers and politicians, the best representatives remaining well above the battle? Remember that. But Francis Jensen says every citizen of a nation is responsible for the actions committed in the name of that nation. Day after day, the system elaborates its evil projects in your presence. Day after day, its leaders betray you. Pursuing in the name of France, a policy as foreign as possible, not only to your real interests, but your deepest needs. You pride yourselves on keeping your distance from realities of a certain kind. So you allow a free hand to those who are immune to the most unhealthy climates because they create climates themselves through their own conduct. And if apparently you succeed in keeping yourselves unsullied, it is because others dirty themselves in your place. You hire thugs and balance the accounts. It is you who are the real criminals. For without your blind indifference, such men could never carry out deeds that damn you as much as they shame those men. I said just above that South Africa has a racist structure. Now I shall go further and say that Europe has a racist structure. It is plain to see that M. Manioni has no interest in this problem, for he says France is unquestionably one of the least racialist-minded countries in the world. Be glad that you are French, my fine Negro friends, even if it is you a little hard, for your counterparts in America are much worse off than you. France is a racist country, for the myth of the bad nigger is a part of the collective unconscious. We shall demonstrate this presently. And he's going to say that, he's going to demonstrate that in chapter 6. But it says, let us proceed with M. Manioni and practice, therefore, an inferiority complex connected with the color of the skin is found only among those who form a minority with a group of another color. In a fairly homogeneous community like that of the Malagasys, where the social framework is still fairly strong, an inferiority complex occurs only in exceptional cases. Once again, one asks the author to be somewhat more careful. A white man in a colony has never felt inferior in any respect, as M. Manioni expresses it so well. He would be defied or devoured. The colonial, even though he is in a minority, does not feel that this makes him inferior. In Martinique, there are 200 whites who consider themselves superior to 300,000 people of color. In South Africa, there are 2 million whites against almost 13 million native people, and it has never occurred to a single black to consider himself superior to a member of the white minority. And that's true, because the idea is it's not about numbers, it's about power, resources, ability, wealth, might, know-how, all those things. That's what it's about at the end of the day. It's not about numbers. If it was about numbers, white supremacy would not exist. While the discoveries of Adler and the no less interesting findings of Cunell explain certain kinds of neurotic behavior, one cannot infer from them laws that will apply immeasurably complex problems. The feeling of inferiority of the colonized is the correlative to the Europeans' feeling of superiority. Let us have the courage to say it outright. It is the racist who creates his inferior. It is the racist who creates his inferior. The conclusion brings us back to Sartre. The Jew is one whom other men consider a Jew. That is the simple truth from which we must start. It is the anti-Semitic who makes the Jew. What becomes of the exceptional cases of which M. Manioni tells us? Quite simply, they are the instances in which the educated Negro suddenly discovers that he is rejected by civilization, which he has none the less assimilated to. Still talking about that power, right? So that the conclusion would come to this: to the extent to which M. Manioni's real typical Malagasy takes on dependent behavior, all is for the best. If, however, he forgets his place, if he takes it into his head to be the equal to the European, then the said European is indignant and cast out the upstart who, in such circumstances, in his exceptional case, pays for his own rejection of dependence with an inferiority complex. Earlier, we uncovered in certain of M. Manioni's statements a mistake that is at the very least dangerous. In effect, he leaves the Malagasy no choice save between inferiority and dependence. These two solutions accepted, there is no salvation. When he, the Malagasy, has succeeded in forming such relations of dependence with his superiors, his inferiority no longer troubles him because he found his comfortable place, right? Everything is all right. When he fails to establish them, when his feeling of insecurity is assuaged in this way, he suffers a crisis. The primary concern of M. Manioni was to criticize the methods hitherto employed by the various ethnographers who have turned their attention to the primitive people. But we see the criticism that must be made of his own work. After having sealed the Malagasy into his own customs, after having evolved a unilateral analysis of his view of the world, after having described the Malagasy within a closed circle, after having noticed that the Malagasy has a dependency relation toward his ancestors, a strong tribal characteristic, Mannione, in defiance of all objectivity, applies his conclusions to a bilateral totality, deliberately ignoring the fact that since Galanini, the Malagasy has ceased to exist, because we're talking about they've been totally colonized. What we wanted from Mannione was an explanation of the colonial situation. He notably overlooked providing it. Nothing has been lost. Nothing has been gained. We agree. I'm messing this person's name up. Prodine Hegel, Georges Blander, said of the dynamics of the personality in an essay devoted to Gardiner and Linton. The list of its stages is the result of all its preceding stages and should contain all the elements. It is whimsical, but it is the principle that guides many scholars, right? The reactions and the behavior patterns to which the arrival of the European in Madagascar gave rise were not tacked onto the pre-existing set. There were no addition to the earlier psychic whole, right? They didn't study them people before they got there. They didn't see what was going on before they got there. They just attached things that they thought would be there to help to justify what they had going on. If, for instance, Martians undertook to colonize the earth, meant not to indicate them into Martian culture, but to colonize them, we should be doubtful of the persistence of any earthly personality. Gardiner changed many opinions when he wrote, "To teach Christianity to the people of Allure would be quixotic, would be a quixotic undertaking." I don't know. I've never seen, that's a new word for me. Quixotic undertaking. It would make no sense in so much as one would be dealing with personalities built out of elements that are in complete disaccord with the Christian doctrine. It would certainly be starting out at the wrong end. And if Negroes are impervious to the teachings of Christ, this is not at all because they are incapable of assimilating them. To understand something new requires that we make ourselves ready for it, that we prepare ourselves for it. It entails the shaping of a new form. It is utopian to exact the Negro or the Arab to exert the effort of embedding abstract values into his outlook on the world when he has barely enough food to keep alive. To ask a Negro of the upper Niger to wear shoes, to say of him that he will never be a Schubert, is less ridiculous than to be surprised that a worker in the Brelet truck factory does not spend his evenings studying lyricism and Hindu literature. Duh, Deidre. Right. Or to say that he will never be Einstein. Actually, in the absolute sense, nothing stands in the way of such things. Nothing except that the people in question lack the opportunities. But they do not complain. Here's the proof. At the hour before dawn on the far side of my father and my mother, the whole hut crackling and blistering, like a sinister punished with boils, and the weather-worn roof patched here and there with pieces of gasoline tins, that the leaves bogs of rust in the dirty gray stinking mud that holds the straw together. And when the wind blows, all this patchwork makes strange sounds, first like something sizzling in a frying pan, and then like a flaming board hurled into the water in a shower of flying sparks. And the bed of planks from which my race has risen, all my race from this bed of planks on its feet of kerosene cases, and if the old bed has elephantitis, covered with goat skin, and its dry banana leaves and its rags, the ghost of a mattress that is my grandmother's bed, above the bed in a pot full of oil and candle end whose flame looks like a fat turnip, and on the side of the pot and letters of gold, merci. Wretchedly, this attitude, this behavior, this shackled life caught in the noose of shame is disaster, rebels, hates itself, struggles, howls, and my God, others ask, what can you do about it? Start something. Start what? The only thing in the world that's worth the effort of starting, the end of the world, by God. What Mannione has forgotten is that the Malagasy alone no longer exists. He has forgotten that the Malagasy exists with the European. The arrival of the white man in Madagascar shattered not only its horizons, but its psychological mechanisms. As everyone has pointed out, alternately from the black man, it is not the black, but the white man. An island like Madagascar invaded overnight by pioneers of civilization, or quote unquote pioneers of civilization. Even if those pioneers conducted themselves as well as they knew how, suffered the loss of its basic structure. And Maoni himself furthermore says as much. The petty kings were all very anxious to get possession of the white man. Explain that is one of many in terms of magical totemic patterns of a need for contact with an awesome God. It is proof of a system of dependency. The fact still remains that something new had come into being, and that island is that had been reckoned with. Otherwise, the analysis is condemned into falsehood, to absurdity and nullity. A new element having been introduced, it became mandatory to seek to understand the new relationships. The landing of the white man on Madagascar inflicted injury without measure. The consequences of that interruption of Europeans into Madagascar were not psychological alone, since, as every authority has observed, there are interrelationships between consciousness and social context. And the economic consequences, why colonization itself must be brought to trial. Let us go on with our study. Here again, we encounter the same, let's go on with our study. In other words, the Malagasy can bear not being a white man. What hurts him cruelly is to have discovered first by identification that he is a man, and later that men are divided into whites and blacks. And if he abandoned or betrayed Malagasy, continues his identification, he becomes clamorous. He begins to demand equality in a way he had never before found necessary. The equality he seeks would have been beneficial before he started asking for it, but afterwards it proves inadequate to remedy his ills, for every increase in equality makes the remaining differences seem the more intolerable, for they suddenly appear agonizingly irremovable. This is the road along with the Malagasy passes the psychological dependence of psychological inferiority. Here again, we encounter the same misapprehension. It is, of course, obvious that the Malagasy can perfectly well tolerate the fact of not being a white man. A Malagasy is a Malagasy, or rather, not as he is a Malagasy, but rather is in absolute sense. He lives his Malagasy-hood. If he is a Malagasy, it is because the white man has come, and if at a certain stage he has been led to ask himself whether he is indeed a man, it is because his reality as a man has been challenged. In other words, I began to suffer from not being a white man to the degree that the white man imposes discrimination on me, makes me a colonized native, robs me of all worth, all individuality, tell me that I am a parasite on the world, that I must bring myself as quickly as possible into step with the white world, that I am a brute beast, that my people and I are like a walking dung heap that disgustingly fertilizes sweet sugar cane and silky cotton, that I have no use in the world, that I will quite simply try to make myself white. That is, I will compel the white man to acknowledge that I am human. But Maoni will counter, you cannot do it because in your depths, there's a dependency complex. Not all peoples can be colonized, only those who experience the need for a dependency. It's crazy. And a little later, whatever Europeans have founded colonies, the type we are considering, it can safely be said that their coming was unconsciously expected, even desired by the future subject peoples. Everywhere there existed legends foretelling the arrival of strangers from the sea, bearing wondrous gifts for them. It becomes obvious that the white man acts in obedience with an authority complex, a leadership complex, while the Malagasy obeys a dependency complex. Everyone is satisfied. White people really believe that. White people really believe that black people were waiting on them and dependent upon them, waiting on them to come save them. When the question arises of understanding why the European, the foreigner, was called Vazaha, which means honorable stranger, when it is a matter of understanding why shipwrecked Europeans were welcomed with open arms, While the European, the foreigner, was never thought of as an enemy, instead of explaining these things in terms of humanity, of goodwill, of courtesy, basic characteristics of what Cesar calls the old courtly civilizations. Scholars tell us that it happened quite simply because inscribed in fateful hieroglyphics, specifically the unconscious, there exists something that makes the white man the awaited master. Yes, the unconscious. We have got to that. But one must not extrapolate. A Negro tells me his dreams. I had been walking for a long time. I was extremely exhausted. I had the impression that something was waiting for me. I climbed barricades and walls. I came into an empty hall, and from behind the door, I heard a noise. I hesitated before I went in, but I finally made up my mind and opened the door. In this second room, there were white men, and I found that I was too white. When I try to understand this dream, I analyze it, knowing that my friend has had problems in his career. I conclude that my dream fulfills an unconscious wish. But when outside my psychoanalytic office, I have to incorporate my conscience into the context of the world. I will assert, one, my patient is suffering from an inferiority complex. His psychic structure is in danger of disintegration. What has to be done is to save him from this, and little by little to rid him of this unconscious desire. Two, if he is overwhelmed to such a degree by the wish to be white, it is because he lives in a society that makes his inferiority complex possible, in a society that derives its sustainability from the perception of this complex, in a society that proclaims the superiority of one race to the identical degree to which that society creates difficulties for him. He will find himself thrust into a neurotic situation. What emerges then is the need for combined action on the individual and on the group. As a psychoanalyst, I should help my patient to become conscious of his unconscious and abandon his attempts at a hallucinatory whitening, but also to act in the direction of a change in the social structure. In other words, the black man should no longer be confronted by the dilemma, turn white or disappear, but he should be able to take the cognizance of a possibility of existence. In still other words, if society makes difficulties for him because of his color, if in his dreams he established the expression of unconscious desire to change color, my objective would not be that of discouraging him from it by advising him to keep his place. On the contrary, my objective, once his motivations have been brought into consciousness, will be to put him in a position to choose action or passivity with respect to the real source of the conflict, that is, toward the social structures. Conscientious in his desire to examine the problem from every angle, M. Manioni has not overlooked the investigation of the unconscious of the Malagasy. To this end, he analyzes 7 dreams, 7 narratives that open the unconscious to us, and in 6 of them, we find a dominant theme of terror. 6 children as an adult tell us their dreams, and we see them troubling, seeking flight, unhappy. The cook's dream. I was being chased by an angry black bull. Terrified, I climbed up into a tree and stayed there until the danger was past. I came down again, trembling all over. It's the dream of a 13-year-old boy. While going for a walk in the woods, I met 2 black men. Oh, I thought I am done for. I tried to run away, but I couldn't. They barred my way and began jabbering in a strange tongue. I thought they were saying, "We'll show you what death is." I shivered with fright and begged, "Please, sir, let me go. I am so frightened." One of them understood French, but in spite of that, they said, "We're going to take you to our chief." As we set off, they made me go in front as they showed me their rifles. I was more frightened than ever, but before reaching their camp, we had to cross a river. I've dived deep into the water, and thanks to my presence of mind, found a rocky cave where I hid. When the 2 men had gone, I ran back to my parents' house. This is Josette's dream. The dreamer, a young girl, got lost and sat down on a fallen tree trunk. A woman in a white dress told her that she was in the midst of a band of robbers. The account goes on. "I am a schoolgirl," I said, trembling, "and I lost my way here when I was going home from school." And she replied, "Follow this path, child, and you will find your way home." Dream of a 14-year-old boy. He is being chased by a Senegalese soldier who makes a noise like galloping horses as they run and show their rifles in front of them. The dreamer escapes by becoming invisible. He climbs a stairway and finds the door of his home. The dream of an elephant, a girl of 13 or 14. I dreamed of a fierce black ox was chasing me. He was big and strong. On his head, which was almost molted with white, he had 2 long horns with sharp points. Oh, how dreadful, I thought. The path was getting narrower. What should I do? I perched myself in a mango tree, but the ox rent its trunk. Alas, I fell among the bushes. Then he pressed his horns into me. My stomach fell out and he devoured me. This is Roz's dream. In his dream, the boy heard someone say at school that the Senegalese were coming. I went out of the schoolyard to see. The Senegalese were indeed coming. He ran home, but our house had been dispersed by them too. This is the dream of a 14-year-old boy. I was walking in the garden and I felt something like a shadow behind me. All around me, the leaves were rustling and falling off, as if a robber was hiding among them, waiting to catch me. Whenever I walked up and down the alleys, the shadows stirred following me. Suddenly, I got frightened and started running, and the shadow took great strides and stretched out his huge hand and took hold of my clothes. I felt my shirt tearing and screamed. My father jumped out of the bed when he heard me scream and came over to look at me. But the big shadow had disappeared, and I was no longer afraid. Some 10 years ago, I was astonished to learn that the North Africans despised men of color. It was absolutely impossible for me to make any contact with the local population. I left Africa and went back to France without having fathomed the reason for this hostility. Meanwhile, certain facts had me think. The Frenchman does not like the Jew, who does not like the Arab, who does not like the Negro. The Arab is told, if you are poor, it is because the Jew has bled you and taken everything from you. The Jew is told you are not of the same class as the Arab because you are really white and because you have Einstein and Bergsons. The Negro is told you are the best soldiers in the French Empire. The Arabs think they are better than you, but they are wrong. But that is not true. The Negro is told nothing because no one has anything to tell him. The Senegalese trooper is a trooper, the good soldier under command, the brave fellow who only knows how to obey. You know, come in. Why not? Me not know. You know, come in. Unable to stand up to all the demands, the white man sloughs off his responsibilities. I have a name for this procedure, the racial distribution of guilt. I have remarked that certain things surprise me. Whenever there has been any attempt at insurrection, the military authorities have ordered only colored soldiers into action. They were men of color who nullified the liberation efforts of other men of color, proof that there was no reason to universalize the procedure. If those good-for-nothings, the Arabs, took it into their heads to revolt, it was not in the name of any acceptable principle, but purely and simply in order to get rid of the big hot unconscious. From the African point of view, a colored student said at the 25th Congress of Catholic Students during its discussion of Madagascar, I wish to protest against the dispatch of Senegalese troops there and the misuse that is being made of them. We know from other sources that one of the torturers and the tentative police headquarters was a Senegalese. Therefore, since all we know is this, since all we know is the archetype of the Senegalese can represent for the Malagasy, the discoveries of fraud are of no use to us here. What must be done is to restore this dream what must be done is to restore this dream to its proper time, and this time to its period during which 8,000 natives were killed. That is to say, one of every 50 persons in the population, and to its proper place, to its place in the island of 4 million people, at the center of which no real relationship can be established, where dissension breaks out in every direction, where the only masters are lies on demagogy. One must concede that some circumstances in the Sokius is more important than the individual. I recall what Pierre Nivelle wrote. And Nivelle wrote, "No, Monsieur le Directeur, it is not true." Thereupon he sent me back to the first torture chamber and called in another Senegalese, since one was not enough. And he ordered them to hold me up by the feet and lower me into the bucket as far as my chest. They only did several times. Finally, I told them, it's too much. Let me talk in Baron. And to him, I said, I request at least that I be treated in a manner befitting France, Monsieur le Directeur, to which he replied, you are getting French treatment. Since I should stand no more, I said to him, all right, I'll accept the first part of your statement. And Baron replied, no, I do not want the first part. I want it all. Am I supposed to lie? Then lie or not lie? No lie. You must agree to what I tell you. The testimony went on. Immediately, M. Baron said, try some other method on him. It was taken back into the adjoining room where there was a small stone stairway. My arms were tied behind me. The two Senegalese again held me with my feet in the air and made me go up and down the stairs in this way. This was beginning to be unendurable, and even if I had any more strength left, it was physically too much. I said to the Senegalese, tell your boss I'll agree to what he wants me to say. And then in parentheses, it says, in the session of August 11th, Robert A. Defiant testified. The policeman took me by my shirt collar and kicked me in the behind and punched me in the face. He then forced me to kneel, and Baron began hitting me again. Without my knowing how he managed it, he got behind me and I felt hot irons against the back of my neck. I tried to protect myself with my hands and they were burned too. The third time I was knocked down, I lost consciousness and I didn't know any more what happened. M. Baron told me to sign the paper that was all ready. I shook my head no. Then the director called the Senegalese in again and have carried me into another torture chamber. You better give in or you'll be dead, Senegalese said. The director said that this lookout, you have to get started. Jean, my arms were tied behind my, and that's where it stops. To speak of society's dreams as one speaks of the dreams of the individual, to discuss collective will to power as one discusses individual sexual drive, is to reverse the natural order of things once more, because on the contrary, it is the economic and social conditions of class conflicts that explain and determine the real conditions in which individuals sexually express themselves, and because the content of the human being's dreams depends also in the last analysis on the general conditions of the culture which he lives. And so he goes on to say, the enraged black bull is not the phallus. The two black men are not the father figures, and one standing for the real father, the other for the primal ancestor. Here's what a thorough analysis could have found on the same basis of M. Manioni's conclusion in this section: the cult of the dead in the family. The rifle of the Senegalese soldier is not a penis, but a genuine rifle. Model label 1619. The black bull and the robber are not Lolos, reincarnated souls, but actually the eruption of real fantasies into sleep. What does this stereotype, the central theme of the dreams, represent, if not a return to the right road? Sometimes we have black soldiers, sometimes black bulls, speckled with white at the head, sometimes outright a white man who is quite kind. What do we find in all these dreams, if not this central idea? To depart from the routine is to wander in pathless woods. There you will meet the bull who will send you running helter-skelter home again. Settle down, Malagasys, and stay where you belong. After having described the Malagasy psychology, M. Manioni takes it upon himself to explain colonialism's reasons for existence. In the process, he adds a new complex to the standing catalog, the Prospero complex. It is defined as the sum of those unconscious neurotic tendencies to delineate at the same time to picture of the paternalist colonial and the portrait of the racialist whose daughter has suffered the imaginary attempted grape at the hands of an inferior being. Prospero, as we know, is the main character of Shakespeare's comedy, The Tempest. The Tempest. Opposite him, we have his daughter, Miranda, and Caliban. Toward Caliban, Prospero assumes an attitude that is well known to Americans in the southern United States. Are they not forever saying that the N-words are just waiting for a chance to jump on the white woman? In any case, what is interesting in this part of the book and the intensity in which Imanioni makes us feel is irresolved conflicts that seem to be at the root of the colonial vocation. In effect, he tells us he tells us if one adds too many Europeans go to the colonies because it is possible for them to grow rich quickly there, with the rare exceptions, the colonial is a merchant or rather a trafficker. One will have grasped the psychology of man who arouses the auto autochthenosis population, the feeling of inferiority. As for the Malagasy dependency complex, at least in the only form in which we can reach it and analyze it, it too proceeds from the arrival of white colonizers on the island. From its other form, from its original complex, and its pure state that supposedly characterized the Malagasy mentality throughout the whole pre-colonial period, it appears to me that Imanioni lacks the slightest basis on which to ground any conclusion applicable to the situation, the problems, or the potentialities of Malagasy in the present time. And that is the end of chapter 4. And so, get to these last couple points before we close this out, right? So Fanon is one of the conclusions, or one of the main points is, the key points is the role of colonial education in society. So colonized individuals are trained through schools, media, and religion to believe that they're incapable of self-rule. The social conditioning is mistaken by Western psychology as a personal psychological problem when it is actually a systematic oppression problem, right? And so those means are meant to program. Those means are meant to create behaviors, create mindsets, create reactions in a specific way for people to exist in a specific manner. Not in a way to empower or to uplift Black people, but to keep Black people at a specific state, a dependent state, a state that they know that they would need white people, because it is a relationship where white people need Black people, but Black people need white people. And white people are able to exploit the need of Black people upon them. This also goes into talking about alienation through Western psychology. Applying European psychoanalysis to colonized people ignores cultural and historical context. They're only looking at the Blacks through the lens of white people. This is how we behave. This is how we get down. This is our existence. This is our history. This is how we move. This is how we move. So everybody must move like this. Everybody must exist like this. Everybody must be like this. This social conditioning, for now, in this sense, psychology must be rethought to address real conditions of colonized peoples, not impose the European framework on them. And the last is the mask of dependency. Colonizers use the idea of the dependency complex to justify domination, claiming colonized people were naturally childlike, weak, or unable to govern themselves. This reinforced racist stereotypes and the continuation of colonial control. They needed us to save them. Like I said earlier, that's what the white are getting at. They need us to save them. Those dangerous Negroes, those uncouth Negroes, those uncivilized Negroes needed humanity. They needed God. They needed direction. They needed civility. So here we are. We gave that to them, and look at how they're complaining. Because remember, early in the reading, it was getting at like Black people had prophecies of white people coming to save them. They were waiting on the white people to come save them. This is what they're telling themselves. This is how they justify in their minds the continued colonization, the continued white supremacy, right? So Fanon's main argument was colonized people do not suffer from inherent dependency complex. The so-called dependency is a direct result of colonial domination, systematic racism, and enforced inferiority. What Western psychologists misdiagnose as personal weakness is actually the psychological consequences of oppression. So the final thought for this video is, Fanon reminds us that psychology cannot be separated from history and politics. What looks like dependency is not a flaw in the Black psyche. It is a wound of colonialism. Psychology cannot be separated from history and politics. Psychology cannot be separated from history and politics. If you don't study a people as a whole, you don't know what you study. you're only going to be confused. You don't really know what's going on. And then you're looking at it from the lens of the oppressor. So that is chapter 4. So chapter 4 goes from page 80, I said 83 to 108. Age 83 to 108. That's chapter 4. And chapter 5 is the fact of blackness. That starts on page 109. That's what we get into next week. So make sure you be back next week for chapter 5. But these white folk funny. Everything that happening to us is some kind of complex, some kind of degenerate form of existence that we always had. And their whole, I guess, relationship with us has been them saving us from ourselves. That's crazy. And man, y'all make sure y'all hit that like button, comment, subscribe, and share so we can continue learning about what happened to us, why it keeps happening to us, so we can get this information, put the puzzle together, use the pieces of the puzzle, put the puzzle together, and save ourselves and move forward. Become a powerful group of people. Black power. I'll catch y'all on the other side. I love y'all. See y'all later.